In the 1950s, staying warm wasn't about comfort. In many places, it was about survival, and the most important heating system in the house wasn't the fireplace or the stove. It was the floor beneath your feet. That sounds strange today, but half a century ago, cold homes were genuinely deadly. Winter killed quietly. Infants, the elderly and the sick were especially vulnerable. Central heating was rare, insulation was poor, and fuel was expensive. So families relied on a forgotten trick that worked silently, efficiently, and without electricity. A method built into the floor itself. And once you understand how it worked, you start to realize just how clever people had to be before modern heating made us lazy. Why cold homes were so dangerous in the mid-20th century. The 1950s sat at an awkward crossroads. Electricity existed, but it wasn't universal. Central heating systems were still a luxury in most parts of the world. Many homes relied on a single heat source, usually a coal stove or wood burner placed in one room. That heat didn't travel well. Warm air rose and escaped through drafty ceilings. Cold air pooled near the ground. Bedrooms, hallways, and especially floors stayed icy for months at a time. Doctors at the time knew the danger. Prolonged exposure to cold indoor temperatures weakened the immune system, worsened respiratory illness, and pushed already fragile people toward hypothermia. In severe winters, excess deaths rose sharply, not from dramatic accidents, but from slow, relentless cold. So households adapted, not with gadgets, but with design. Here's the part most people miss. Heat loss doesn't start at the windows. It starts under your feet. Cold ground acts like a giant heat sponge. If your floor sits directly over earth or an unheated crawl space, it pulls warmth out of the room non-stop. Even if the air feels warm, your body loses heat fast through contact with a cold surface. People in the 1950s understood this instinctively. Many had grown up without shoes indoors. They knew cold floors meant cold bodies. So, instead of chasing heat with bigger fires, they focused on trapping it where it mattered most. The forgotten trick beneath the boards. The secret floor trick wasn't a single invention. It was a system, built from simple ideas, layered together. The first part was the raised floor. Many homes were built with floorboards lifted above the ground, creating a shallow air gap underneath. That air pocket acted as insulation. Still air is a poor conductor of heat, and even a small gap slowed the cold creeping up from the soil. But the real genius came next. Builders and homeowners filled that space strategically. Ash from coal fires, sawdust, straw, cork granules, or even compacted newspaper were packed beneath the boards. These materials were cheap, dry, and, honestly, surprisingly effective insulators. They trapped air and blocked moisture, which are, two things cold depends on to spread. This wasn't theory. It was tested by winters that punish mistakes. So, you might wonder, why did ash and sawdust work so well? Well, coal ash might sound like just another waste product, but it actually had one huge advantage. It was already dry and mineral-based, you know. When packed beneath floors, it resisted rot and even discouraged pests. But more importantly, coal ash created a dense thermal barrier that made a real difference in keeping homes warm. Sawdust and wood shavings, on the other hand, worked a bit differently. They trapped layers of air between their fibres, which really slowed down heat transfer. And when these materials were kept dry, they performed way better than just bare soil or empty space under the floor. In a lot of homes, these materials were topped off with heavy planks and thick rugs. This combination created what you might call a thermal sandwich, locking warmth right inside the living space and making those chilly nights a bit more bearable. This wasn't luxury, it was necessity. Heat rises, but comfort starts low. Modern heating systems focus on air temperature, but the human body experiences comfort differently. Cold feet trigger heat loss fast. Warm floors, even just slightly warm ones, change how a room feels entirely. Homes using insulated floors could maintain livable conditions with far less fuel. Fires burned smaller and shorter. Stoves worked smarter, not harder. This really mattered when, fuel shortages were common. Coal deliveries could be delayed, and wood had to be chopped by hand. Every saved hour of heat was a win. And here's the clever part. These floors worked silently. No moving parts, no maintenance. Once installed, they protected the household year after year. This idea didn't just appear out of nowhere in the 1950s. It was inherited. Raised, insulated floors existed centuries earlier in colder regions. From Scandinavian timber homes to East Asian ondol-inspired designs, people learned long ago that the ground was the enemy in winter. The 1950s simply adapted that wisdom using the materials at hand. Industrial waste like ash met old-world logic. Survival thinking met modern constraints. This is a pattern you see again and again in history. When technology lags, ingenuity fills the gap. So why don't we hear about it today? Central heating changed everything. Once warm air could be pushed through an entire house, floors became an afterthought. Concrete slabs replaced raised wood floors. Carpets replaced layered insulation strategies. The problem is that slabs bleed heat constantly. That's why modern systems run non-stop in winter. We brute force warmth instead of preserving it. The old floor trick faded, not because it stopped working, but because, we stopped needing to think that hard about survival indoors. Until energy prices rise, or, systems fail. Here's the interesting part. This isn't just history. It's practical knowledge. In a grid-down situation, like a power outage or a fuel shortage, modern homes really struggle. They're just designed to depend on constant energy input. But, insulating the floor, even just temporarily, changes the whole equation. Thick mats, layered rugs, cardboard, foam, or even dry natural materials can totally recreate the effect. Raising sleeping areas off the ground reduces heat loss dramatically. And honestly, even just a few inches matter. People in the 1950s weren't tougher than us. They were simply smarter about physics. They understood that warmth isn't created, it's conserved. When you read mortality reports from harsh winters in the mid-20th century, a pattern emerges. Homes that retained heat saw fewer deaths, not because they were warmer overall, but because they avoided prolonged exposure to cold surfaces. The floor trick bought time. It reduced stress on the body. It allowed people to sleep, recover, and survive until spring. That's the difference between discomfort and danger. And it all came down to what was beneath the boards. This is why forgotten techniques matter. Not because we want to live like it's 1950, but because these ideas were shaped by reality, not convenience. The people who built these floors weren't chasing efficiency ratings. They were trying to keep their families alive through winter with what they had. No apps, no sensors, just an understanding of heat, materials, and human limits. That kind of knowledge doesn't expire. Modern survival thinking often focuses on tools, weapons, or dramatic scenarios. But real survival is quieter. It's about staying warm, staying dry, conserving energy. You know, the secret floor trick reminds us that small design choices can have life-saving consequences. And honestly, the smartest solutions are often the simplest. If you want to understand how people survived before modern systems, well, you have to look down, not up. Because sometimes the difference between life and death was literally underfoot. If you found this story useful, go ahead and give the video a like. It really helps keep these forgotten techniques alive. Subscribe to Legacy of Survival for more real-world history that still works today. And hey, share this with someone who thinks survival is all about gear. Sometimes it's just about the floor beneath your feet.